Welcome. I love it when we have a full house. Austin, very nice. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Becca Snell, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator here at the Chapman. And tonight we're in for a treat because we have our very own Maureen Folk, who is the Curator of Collections here at the Chapman. So it's a family affair. All right, and Maureen's going to be talking about our current exhibition, which some of you have already had the chance to check out, which is called Dining Out. This exhibition opened up in January, so it's been a little while. We had to get her on the schedule eventually. And it highlights some of the stories of select local restaurants. It traces their roots, shows their evolution as part of as integral parts of the community. And it also touches on collaborations with area farms and kind of that farm to table mindset that we have or are hoping to have. In tonight's talk, Maureen is going to share the process of curating this exhibition, the work that goes into it, how she selected the pieces that are there, as well as the restaurant's connections to the local farms. And she's also going to share how these establishments have helped shape the region's vibrant food cultures. So I will say that the gallery will remain open after Maureen's talk. So if you had to rush through or didn't get to check it out, it will be open, so don't panic. And without further ado, I will give it over to you.
How long is the exhibit?
That's a very good question. It is open until May 25th, correct?
I think so, yeah.
So you've got a little bit of time. If you found something you really love and you want to come back, it's open until May. All right.
All right. Thank you, Becca. And thanks everybody for coming out and joining us tonight for a talk. I know we have lots of familiar faces, so it's good to see people coming again and again for the lectures. So I just want to talk about this exhibition because it was just so much fun for me to put together and a lot of fun for us to do. And not every exhibition gets to be like that, but this was kind of one of those ones that just, all the content was just fun. So I'm going to talk for a little bit, but then I'm going to invite you to, like Becca said, go check out the gallery after the talk, and something I might say you might be interested in following up on, so go check that out when we're done. All right, so I want to start briefly by talking about the evolution of restaurants really broadly, because restaurants have been a part of the human experience for centuries. We can look back and look at taverns and inns. Those served as some of the earliest communal dining spaces. These establishments weren't just places to eat, but they also served as social centers and places for travelers and locals. They gathered to exchange news, conduct business, and build just those community ties. So with the rise of the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, the dynamics of dining out really begin to shift. And as more people move to cities to begin working in factories and offices, we start to see more affordable, convenient meals are needed outside of the home. And so this demand helps to spur the growth of restaurants that catered specifically to workers, including places like lunch counters and cafeterias. And then by the early 20th century, we see classic spots like diners and soda fountains start to emerge. So while diners and soda fountains dominated the landscape for a time, and I know we all have a diner in mind, that's a classic diner that we love to go to, so those have stood the test of time. But the post-World War II era really brought a boom of fast food chains that emphasized something different. And they focused on speed, consistency, convenience, perfect for the car-centered suburban lifestyle that was really just spreading across the US. And in the decades that followed, restaurants started to diversify dramatically from that. The rise of global travel and immigration introduced Americans to a broader range of cuisines. And while the growth of food media, from cookbooks and television shows to Instagram and food blogs, those turned dining into an experience and a form of self-expression even. So today, restaurants range from fine dining destinations to pop-up food trucks and everything in between. And these restaurant trends, we see them happening nationally, but I wanted to talk about it because we're also seeing them locally. And we see that same timeline play out right here in the Southern Adirondacks. So when we started considering the idea of covering restaurants for an exhibition, we had to begin somewhere. So we posted on our social media, and we simply asked for feedback from followers and others. What was your favorite restaurant? Just to kind of get a list going, get an idea of what people would connect with. And so that's where we decided to start. So I wrote down all of these restaurants that people had put in the comments. These are just some of the comments. There were more. And then I went to our collections database and I began to search for materials that we might have that are related to these specific restaurants. There were a lot mentioned that I had expected to see, like the Harvest, Peter's Diner, New Way, Massey's. I think Massey's came up the most. But there were also ones that I didn't recognize. So there are some hidden gems in there too. I think Gold Shade was one I didn't recognize right away. So after using this list of starting restaurants, I began to keyword search our database and try and find everything that we had that pertained to local restaurants. So this could include menus, photographs, postcards, matchbooks, souvenir glassware, advertisements, all sorts of different things. And the narrative of the exhibition is really guided by the physical objects that we have in the collection. And we want to be able to use those to support that narrative. And so we needed to see exactly what we had in the collection before we could kind of develop what the story would be. So I was happy to learn through this research phase that we had a good amount of material here that we could use, particularly photographs from about 1940 to 1970. And you can see here on this slide, this is what our database looks like when we put together a list of objects from the collection that's like, oh, we want these to be all part of the same project. This is how we kind of compile our collections items. So all of these things that you see here on this slide are items that were pulled for the exhibition. So one of the reasons that we have so many restaurant photos from that time period that I just mentioned is because in 1964, a gentleman named Harvey Rosenblum went around photographing buildings around town, including ones that were slated to be torn down for urban renewal projects. And so not all of the buildings he photographed were torn down, but what he was trying to do was capture the region as it was prior to this really big project. And people who have lived here know how much the landscape of downtown changed post-urban renewal. And so he was trying to capture what downtown looked like at this time. And then in 1976, the museum actually purchased that collection of photographs for us to have. It's very rare that we would purchase materials for the museum, but if an item or a collection of items comes up that either provide a real wealth of information or build on collections that we already have established here, those are the ones that we consider more seriously for purchase. And this one, like I said, this is really, he captured Glens Falls in the 60s, and that is a huge amount of information and just a treasure trove for us to have here. So this collection was purchased because it's a record of how those different parts of Glens Falls looked prior to that major city development. So in this phase of research, I also found that we have a robust collection of photographs that pertain to the old trading post from the 1930s. So most restaurants, we had like one or two photos, maybe one or two souvenir things or a little thing. We had 80 photographs of the trading post. And unfortunately, they're chock full of individuals, which looks like a couple that's on a trip. We have no idea who they are. I wish we knew, but they're great photos from the 30s. And so this is just some of them here. 3 of them did make it into the show. So you'll see those on the wall. So once we found all the materials that we had decided we were going to use, we were able to group the objects together and tell the histories of DeSantis Restaurant, Harold's Country Kitchen, Commodore Restaurant, Old Trading Post, Massey's, Imperial Restaurant, The Colonial, New Way Lunch, and Peter's Diner. So these were the restaurants that we had at least one object or photograph in the collection from, with 2 exceptions. We'll get to that. And next it was time to research and write out a brief history of these restaurants. And the research for this exhibition led to some really fun finds. As an example, when I was looking into Harold's Country Kitchen, I found out that Maureen Monahan Chase actually ran her catering business out of that same building after Harold's. And Maureen is a dear friend of the Chapman. And so I reached out to her and she came in, she brought some photos of when she occupied the space, and she took pictures of the mural that was at Harold's. And we didn't have those in our collection, so we were able to add that to the exhibition because of that connection. So some really fun things. And she was also the one who told me that after school, all of the St. Mary's students would go and fill the booths and get their soda and gravy fries. So now I would have loved to have included other staples like the harvest, but that was a decision solely based on what we have here in the collection. And when we don't have materials that relate to them directly, it makes it hard for our out of area visitors to connect with what we're talking about. So if you're familiar with the area, you can come in and read a thing about the harvest and know exactly where the harvest is and know exactly what the harvest looks like. But somebody who's visiting us here at the museum might not know. And so it's important for us to make sure that we can give them a visual aid to help guide them. With that said, here are the two exceptions that we didn't have materials on in the collection. And I broke my rule, but I broke it for New Way Lunch and Peter's Diner. And I think that that's appropriate. And I did that because New Way and Peter's have been such important and long-time staples on South Street. I can't leave them off the list for this exhibit because of that reason. So I reached out to the Folk Life Center and at Crandall Library, and luckily they were able to send us a photograph of the original New Way Lunch location. And that was at 54 South Street before they moved to their current location in 2006. But they also came up empty-handed when it came to Peter's Diner. So if you have anything about Peter's Diner, a photo, anything. Yes, but I reached out to several restaurants and I didn't get any responses. And I think that's just the nature of the restaurant is focused on what they've got to do. And I respect that. So I didn't hear from any of the restaurants that I reached out to, unfortunately. But we were able to include some pictures and things from the newspaper that we included in the exhibit, so of Peter's. So you can still see this in the exhibit. All right, so I just want to take a few minutes and give a quick history of two restaurants that we wanted to include, but just for the interest of space, we couldn't. The first is Peking Restaurant. So we actually have a copy of the menu here. I have a few menus up on this if you want to come take a look at them after. Peking is right over here. And along with this photograph, which is in the exhibit. And it's just a sign that's pointing you towards Peking Restaurant. So it's not a photo of the actual restaurant. So a little bit about it. In 1972, Philip and Winnie Lau opened the doors of Peking Restaurant and brought Chinese and Polynesian cuisine to the region. They moved to the United States from Hong Kong in 1963, and they began working first in a restaurant in Rutland, Vermont. And then in 1969, they opened their first independent restaurant in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. By 1972, that's when they moved here to the Glens Falls region, and they opened Peking in 1973. And then just 3 years later, in 1975, the restaurant unfortunately was partially destroyed in a fire. Following that loss, the restaurant relocated to the former Gourmet Restaurant building that was next to the Mount Royal Motel on Route 9 in Queensbury. They stayed at this spot for just over 10 years, but in 1986, they moved the restaurant across the street and then named it Jade Palace. Familiar to anyone? So they worked in the restaurant industry for the next 20 years. But after all that time, Philip Lau then decided he wanted to try something new. They were done with the restaurant industry, so they sold their business. They didn't reopen another. But one of the reasons that I want to talk about the Laus and their why they may have chosen to go into the restaurant business in the United States, and I think part of it is really, really good timing. So like I mentioned in the beginning, during the mid-20th century, the United States is seeing a significant increase in international cuisine restaurants, particularly after World War II. And several key factors contributed to this growth, including post-war immigration, economic growth that allowed for international travel, as more Americans were able to afford travel more, They could expand their tastes, try new foods. That's really happening in the 50s and 70s. That's starting to boom. And then the last was this huge culinary boom in media from the 1970s to the 1990s, when cooking shows and celebrity chefs popularized more international cuisines. So there was plenty of interest in international cuisines during this time frame, and the Louds were able to really capitalize on that. And you can see some of those early popular TV chefs here, like James Beard, Emeril Lagasse, Joyce Chen is there in the middle, Julia Child, of course, and the Swedish chef, lest we forget. So another restaurant that I want to give just a brief history of, because we didn't include them, was The Harvest. We tried to connect with them. Our TV screen in the exhibit, you'll see interviews with some of our volunteers here at the museum. We tried to connect with The Harvest and follow a chef making a pizza for a day, but we weren't able to make that work. And I think the restaurant recently sold, and I think we just caught them at a bad time. So, but we did talk with them, and we went there in person, so I tried. I want to include The Harvest in this talk because, like I said earlier, it's an important staple. People in this area love The Harvest. Also, from what I've read, it's a favorite of Rachel Ray's. So a big local restaurant. So in 1972, the lot on the corner of Bay and Cronin Roads in Queensbury was purchased by Phil Hart for $17,000. Can't buy a restaurant for that anymore. Phil Hart began his career in restaurants working with his father, Harry Hart, at their restaurant, Hart's, which is now Talk of the Town. He worked for his father for about 10 years before he felt confident enough in the industry to kind of strike out on his own. But Phil and Linda Hart, they live in Florida now, but Phil made a great decision that day when he decided to take the leap, because Harvest remains a staple of this community, and it celebrated its 50th year in business in 2022. In a Chronicle article celebrating that anniversary, Phil Hart personally expressed the importance of working with local companies, buying local products, and employing local. And that's a legacy that I think the new owners intend to keep, from what I've seen. What became clear to me during research for all of these restaurants is that no two restaurants kind of took the same path, but they were all started by different people in the region that had dreams and goals of just being successful and just getting that place started. And so they all kind of have that common ground. So aside from the restaurants throughout the exhibition, we also included some items that were not directly related to the restaurants themselves, but helped bolster the story that we were telling. So a few of the restaurants were unfortunately destroyed by fires, like the Commodore. This photo is in the exhibit. So we pulled a fire helmet and part of an old fire hose to help just kind of supplement what we were talking about with the Commodore. We also included soda bottles that weren't directly related to a specific restaurant, so much as just popular sodas at different spots during the time. And I also want to take a second and highlight some of my personal favorite objects. This is one, which is the April 4th edition of Look magazine. And it's when they did their feature on Glens Falls in 1944. I'm sure some of you are familiar. The magazine ended up producing, I think, 6 total issues that featured Glens Falls as the ideal home front during the war. But the reason I included it in this show is because the photographs in the magazine captured scenes inside various local restaurants. So there's a scene, I think it's open to this page in the exhibit. There's a scene of police officers sitting at the counter at Glens Falls Diner. So it's just got some really good shots in there. I think the page is open to names another 3 or 4 restaurants. So definitely check that out. And the Folklife Center actually has a small exhibit up right now about the anniversary of Look magazine, because it's been just over 80 years since that was published. So definitely go check that out if you're interested. And as for other materials in the show, I just loved looking at all the menus. I heard some people comment on it, the prices. It's crazy to look at the prices and some of just the foods that people were eating. I have, like I said, a bunch of menus up here, so please feel free to come up and see them at the end. So in looking at those menus specifically and how they changed, I think if we had a more robust collection of menus, we could simply do an exhibition on changing food tastes and changing cost. But as time has passed, some of these menus would be really outdated in terms of food preferences. So just as an example, I want to take a look at this Madden Drug Company cafe menu. This is in the exhibit. It's under the main title, Dining Out. And some of the sandwiches here include cheese and nut. That's here. Egg and olive. Egg and olive. And then cheese and olive. Those were the three that really stood out to me. And those stood out to me because I've never in my life seen those on a menu. And I know that I'm a younger person and that's not necessarily what would be on the menu, but they stood out to me. I've had a ham sandwich, I've had a chicken salad sandwich, but never egg and olive. So it struck me. But it was also a reflection of the time period and both access and tastes as well. So you'll see canned and pickled items were very popular as well because those olives, they are shelf stable, they're going to last longer. And a couple could be used in a variety of dishes. So you'll see some of those things. But the globalization of our food markets has really been one of the most influential factors in why our tastes and preferences are so different now. What we could order at a restaurant used to rely on what was accessible in the local food market. If we were in Mexico City, we would have access to different fruits and vegetables than the ones being grown here in New York. Like look at avocados. They've become so ingrained in our food culture, but we can't locally support the growth of avocados. We have to have a globalized food market in order to get those avocados for ourselves. And because of that globalization of the market, that has shifted our tastes and preferences based on access to those different foods. And in addition to that, immigration has really completely transformed our food landscape. Like I said earlier about that post-World War II surge of immigration, we had more international cuisines from that influx of immigrants. But those individuals also had connections to their own food supplies or food suppliers internationally. So they were bringing in more food to their own markets or use in their own restaurant. And so it just leads to this expansion of our tastes at that time. And this is kind of the perfect transition to talk about the other part of our exhibition, which focuses on local farming. Now, making the connection between local restaurants and local farming for this exhibit really just totally came up organically. During research, we used a lot of newspaper coverage to track the history of restaurants. Some restaurants have records and some might have like an about us on their website, but for the most part, people aren't thinking about recording the history of a restaurant. And so what we'd have to do is trace a lot of those things through the newspaper. They were some of our easiest ways to track restaurant developments like openings, closings, major events or banquets. And luckily, most newspapers have been microfilmed and there's this large database that we use to search those newspapers by key terms. And that's what led to this local farming connection. In searching for restaurant information, we came across a lot of ads, specifically for suppliers of restaurants. This would be especially common for restaurant openings. So dairy or meat suppliers, construction companies, kitchen appliance suppliers, they would all take out ads in the newspaper and say, good luck to the business, and then note that their products had been used in the construction or in the cooking or something like that. So it became really common for me to see these ads of all of these companies and suppliers and farmers that supported the new businesses. And I think we tend to associate the concept of farm to table as a higher cost restaurant, maybe in a more modern time. But what you really see through this is that so many restaurants were serving farm to table simply because the local market was where they were accessing goods. It was more robust, it was more cost effective, it provided fresher products, and it kept money circulating in your local economy. So we have a perfect example here to look at this with. On December 22nd, 1928, Commodore Restaurant opened its doors, and the newspaper had a series of ads that featured suppliers that helped contribute to the Commodore. So you can see here, let me find it, HC Medivere Fish, Meats, Fruits, and Groceries, the Mohican Market. It says fresh baked goods made in our own bakery. And then we've got other places. So they offer their congratulations. Oh, and Home Dairy supplied milk. But beyond the food products, you also see local businesses that would have played a role. So Neon Sign Co. and then awnings. They must have gotten their awning from this gentleman. And they're the person who carried their insurance. So just all of these businesses and other people that played a role in this restaurant opening, all showcased for us to see, which is really nice. And if you were reading the paper, I imagine that this would give you a sense of, it would give, if you were going to the restaurant, a sense of confidence in their products, if you're familiar with some of those listed businesses. And this is still something we see today, but in a little bit of a different form than newspaper ads. So as an example, I'm a big fan of a local bakery. It's called Hawk's Nest. Nobody outside this room can know about it. And their bread is used in a few different local restaurants and other locations. And that knowledge encourages me to go to those restaurants because I love that bread. And I know that that bakery is really good at what they do. And so my assumption as a customer is that because they're using this bread, they must have a good restaurant. So now I'm going to go. And it's a pretty good marketing tool. And this is kind of a similar thing that could be taken away from that. So in looking at the restaurants themselves, as well as their support from local farms, we had some really great materials to bring together for the exhibit. We have a lot of dairy farm products on view for the exhibition, including home dairy bottles that could have been just like the ones that were going to Commodore. In the exhibition, we also briefly touch on how technological changes impacted restaurants and food consumption. And just looking at these two Douglas Crockwell photos, he captured milk bottling machines as well as this large-scale refrigeration units at the Grand Union Meat Department. But mass bottling and refrigeration have had a significant impact on the food industry and restaurants. And this access and the longevity of products being kept has really made a difference for restaurants. So I think we're incredibly lucky that over the course of at least the last century, this small region right here has had such a robust restaurant scene. The dining landscape has been shaped by so many different things: economic conditions, agriculture and supply chain stability, consumer trends and preferences, government regulations and policies, competition, tourism and events, technology and marketing, even real estate and rent costs. All of these have played a role in why our dining landscape has changed over time. We can all think of a favorite restaurant that we thought would be worthy of being in business forever, but even they are not immune to these kinds of fluctuations. So one of my goals for this exhibit was to really evoke nostalgia. A favorite meal out, a favorite restaurant, a special occasion, anything that would spark a memory of being out to eat. It's really been cool to walk through the exhibit and overhear visitors that are just remembering restaurants, and they're like, "Oh, do you remember that place?" So it's been fun to hear that play out in real time. And the exhibition is not exhaustive, and it never could be, because we've had so many restaurants in this region that it'd be impossible to really tell the story of them all. But I think what we were able to bring together is some really fun photographs and objects that help talk about how important eating out can be in our lives and our communities. Restaurant memories are often deeply personal, snapshots of time and place and feelings, preserving not just what's on the menu, but who we were with or what we were celebrating. As children, dining out might be more of a birthday celebration or a messy ice cream cone or a booth where your feet don't touch the ground. But as an adult, the experience shifts. You might do lunches with friends during the work week or dinners to catch up, or there might be a familiar corner table or booth that becomes part of a routine. And so I think it's really cool how dining out can become so ingrained in our day-to-day lives. So today, this region continues to have a really rich dining landscape. We have some of those staple restaurants that have been maintained for decades, but then we also have some new restaurants or newer restaurants that have become new staples. And through all stages of life, restaurants have acted as this third space, this third place where it's neither work nor home, but people can gather, they can connect, they can build community. And so I think it's a really cool thing, really cool role that restaurants play in our lives and our community.